Welcome back. We are going to have the second presentation, but by another renowned speaker, Herbert Dreiseitl. He's a renowned landscape architect, urban designer, water artist, interdisciplinary planner, and a professor in practice. He's also an Harvard GSD Loeb Fellow and Fellow of the Center of Livable Cities in Singapore. He lectures worldwide. He has authored many publications, including recent editions on waterscapes, planning, building, and designing with water. For his work, he received many awards in the United States and around the world. He has founded the Atelier Dreiseitl in the 1980s, a globally integrated design firm with a long-standing history of excellence in urban design, landscape architecture, and resilient ecological planning. Today, Herbert is an independent consultant for many cities and initiatives around the globe. Many thank you, Herbert, for being with us. And then I will introduce the second discussant for this lecture. Is going to be Peter Kostra from TU Delft. Peter is the head of modeling studies group at TU Delft, and he's the coordinator of the master track in architecture. He has worked as a designer and an artist, joining the office of the Dutch government architect as an advisor from 1987 until 1992. He has worked for several governmental institutes and municipalities in the Netherlands as an advisor in arts. In 1998, he founded the Cucina Costa, a design office. Thank you all for being here today. I leave the floor to Herbert. Thank you.
Thank you. I just try to share my screen and then I hope everything works fine. So thank you very much, Laura, for inviting for this, I think, very critical and very important topic. And I heard just Günther Vogt a little bit saying that models and sections are really underestimated, and I fully agree, because in my practice, scale of models and testing out and thinking through models is extremely important. So let me maybe share a little bit the screen, and I would like just to start to get into the lecture. When I say modeling water, it's almost a paradox because I cannot model water. Water is more or less even modeling us. Water is modeling landscape. Modeling means water is actually the greatest landscape architect on this planet. And we are just a little fly in that whole composition of change, of movement. And I think we have to be very clear and very honest also when we look at all the catastrophic situations we have with climate issues, that the impact of humans is very destructive. And if we would learn to think more how water works, we would do much better. So in a lot of things, what I'm doing in my work, I start with thinking, and thinking with fluid movements. Fluid thinking is for me a very important part. And so I often also teach for students in this way, that I say, first let's have a look. Before we start to come up with many conclusions and opinions, let's have a look, how actually is water working? How is water moving? How is water modeling? What is the start of a flow? What's the start of a movement? What's the start of a river? How is a river working? What are the inner structures of movement? How intelligent and how fragile are structures of water, and how are they in a permanent flux, in a permanent change process? Nothing is static, everything is in change, and the change is the most constant element we have on this planet, which is so important. And I think these experiments actually help us to understand much more what it means to work with water. I think also when we look at landscapes and water structures, especially, it's not just that we say, water does whatever it wants. No, there is an extremely interesting structure and intelligence behind that, which is forming and shaping. For example, if you just have a finger going through the air or a little stick going through water, you will find forms like here. But you find them in many scales. You find them in a small scale, but also in a large scale. So some of these photos actually are 400 kilometers long. Some of them are just some millimeters long. They all have this vortex street phenomena, which is extremely interesting. And I think especially when we want to understand landscape from the water point of view, it's an interesting thing where we are just at the beginning of discovering how actually like sponge cities could work, how we could actually create better integrated landscapes. And I think also what Günther said before, in our education, this part is extremely missing in education, to really get into that we get more the process, that we get understanding more really what's going on. And when we just look in history a little bit what was going on, of course, our infrastructure and our cities, they were all formed basically by logic grids, by structures like Jefferson's organization of the terrain in the US, creating parcels which can easily be handled by the market, by real estate, and so on. And we lost the natural flow and structures of this flux and fluxes. And I think it's just in time that we start to look into that more, testing out what is going on. I do this in different universities and I love to do it. And I always know it's hard. It's for me frustrating sometimes to fight in the faculty to say, no, I want to have one day only for water experiments to start to learn. And the students always give a feedback, wow, that really changed my thinking. So this actually is so important that we actually learn more on that. And I will, from there on, go in some of the projects. Let me maybe first go to one, which I just missed one here out here. Sorry. The first project here is, what happened here? Sorry, I have to go here. Okay, one of the first projects which were for me an opportunity to work in my former teams of Atelier Dreiseitl, before then we joined the Ramble Group, was to work with people like Norman Foster for his design center for McLaren. I was responsible for the water and design structures, also of part of the landscape. And we tried to really form it around the water question. And here, the real full-scale model was extremely helpful because what we created was a kind of cooling tower as water art. And the water structure was based on a model, on a mock-up, full scale and one scale in my studio. And so we tested it out, brought it on site, made finally the construction, made this kind of prefabricated elements, and we created a kind of structure which has an enormous effect to cool the temperature. And so we circulate the water, and we can actually have the air condition and the cooling effect for the entire factory, for the entire plant is going through this piece. So it's a kind of combination between art and between a meshing, a function meshing to make it work. And it's using water as circulation to get the heat out of the building, and it works pretty well. And it also is a part of a landscape architecture. For me, this kind of often I find very, very boring and old-fashioned categories of saying, here are the landscape architects, here are the urban planners, here are the architects, here are the artists. For me, this is, I'm sorry to say that, that's so old-fashioned. I think for me, everything is overlapping, and we have to get this interdisciplinary approach much more in our profession. So I was very happy to work, for example, with Renzo Piano and his team on Potsdamer Platz in Berlin, and I would like to show this example. How I started with testing out with real full-scale models to come up with structures on water which are not this kind of stupid often fountains which are just have jumping jets or stuff like that, but more the sensitive forms of water, like standing waves, like reflections, like structures. So I started to come up with models and with modeling structures, and to give opportunities to the water to express its forms. I wanted, for example, to have a stream of water where you have the feeling a whole river is floating. In reality, it's only very little water, where you need to just to have a circulation of a pump. And we use the system also for cleansing and for harvesting rainwater and for recycling this. And actually, the whole model is based on full scale tests, testing things out. And the final result you can actually see today in Berlin. And I would just like to share a little bit how we started to do that. For example, here, full-scale mock-ups. And I know for you younger guys, this sounds like totally crazy. I have to say, in my experience in my life, the reason is not financial, because it's often not so expensive to make models. It's relatively easy with all the materials we have. We are just too lazy. We are too lazy in our fantasy to see that we can actually do things in mock-ups, in models, in different scales. And to work in different scales, it's like thinking. It's like thinking fluidly. It's like creating a kind of observation, which is actually educating yourself. You train yourself to think different by looking at water structures. The water is the best teacher to learn about resilience, about sustainability, about change process, about flexibility. And it actually is teaching us also to find out, you know, what's happening in the hidden parts. I often use, for example, colors. Here, this is just using calcium permanganate, a little color to put in the water, and it creates a kind of understanding of what is really happening. For example, here, a little phenomena called in German turbulenter Wechselsprung. It's a very interesting phenomena. It looks like this, there's a big flow of water, but in reality, it's very, very little water, just in some millimeters going over that. And behind there is a kind of turbulence where you have standing waves. And it's fascinating to work with these little details and make something out of it in a landscape art project. So that's actually the result, what you can see here. And of course, with other artists together, it was great to work on this scale, on this project. And it's still there. And we harvest basically rainwater from the entire site, recycle it, reuse it. The water is very good quality. We have, of course, also, besides this harvesting, we release the water slowly out into the rivers. We clean it in the system and so on. I don't want to mention that too much. Again, thinking with models here, and water, textiles, structures, metal textiles where water is just floating down, light and sound in connection is something which I'm very fascinated. And you can only discover that with real experiments in full scale, in testing out things, structures where we brought up a light feature, which is doing as if water is flowing through the city, and it's a kind of thinking a flow of a hidden and lost stream, which was once in this little town here, and is only a memory line, but this light actually is going up and down according to this water waves and structures, and you only have the water running on different shields. To come up with some really interesting design ideas and structures, you always have to test it out. And you will be very much surprised that sometimes you have something in your fantasy. On computers, you can do it easily, but if you do it in reality on water, you get a correction. You get actually something which says, no, hey, you are just on the wrong track. You have to do it different. And so the learning process is like a dialogue with water to come up with fine forms and fine shapes, which you can then finally use and bring into a design feature. I like to maybe explain that even more on one project, which is in Frankfurt, Frankfurt-Hattersheim, a town square, where the interesting thing was here on this project, I had to create a kind of staircase going up to the town hall. And I wanted to create something in granite. It's actually in Swedish red granite stone. And how to make that work, I will explain that a little bit now with the next slides. I did full-scale mock-ups, models in my studio. So I did basically create a kind of staircase section. You see the little model over here, and in plasticine, and then the big one is actually done in clay at that time. Today we would have also other materials, but at that time it was actually done by hand. And I created this kind of forms and shapes always with water flow. So I started to work on it. And then I was going out and I had a pump and let the water going down, testing it, looking at how the forms, how the water is reacting to it. And the water could tell me somehow by the movements what I have to do and what I have to change. So I started to change it. And this was a kind of step, probably more than 100 times testing this out to get a form which I found is now more relevant and more in harmony with movements, which I think it was actually like a possession here in this form. I was inspired by John Wilkes from London, from England, and worked on these kind of rhythmical forms at that time. So this then finally had to be transformed in reality, in the so full-scale mock-ups in clay, then a negative in plaster, then a positive in plaster, still correcting, and then from this full-scale mock-up, one-to-one, a copy into stone, into granite. This was done by a friend of mine who died just recently, that was actually an amazing work. What was here actually ongoing on that. So you see the scales, you see the stones of that. When I look at it, I was thinking it was a crazy time, but I'm still happy that I had the chance to do that. It sounds like, or it looks like extremely expensive, but it wasn't. It was just a lot of passion, a lot of actually working day and night on this and forming it out. And Albert Hettinger, who was actually helping me on that, was just one person who did all the stonework. And then finally, you can see it over there on the upper left side. We did put it on space with cranes, and we had light from the side. So a very interesting shape and form. And that created this kind of town square plaza, which is still today very, very attractive and interesting. There's the market, there's things going on, and this whole flow and water story goes to the public park and continues to flow. Well, I would like to mention one more thing when I talk about modeling with water, or water is modeling us, is participation, is involvement. I'm a very big, I have to say I'm very convinced that today water is something which belongs to every one of us, and we are all responsible for it. There's never a chance that a company can say, I own this water and I sell it. Water is like air, is something which is a public good. And the way how to work with water is also always a democratic public participation project. So in a lot of the newer projects, I always involve the population. I involve the people who are actually living there. I give one example. This is the Tender Springs Park in Portland, Oregon, where it is a workshop here over a whole weekend, working on water tests, working with little models, working with discussion groups, working with groups to come up with solutions. And what we did finally in this kind of workshop was coming up with really interesting solutions or directions, which came basically from from the local people. What would they like to see? How would we rediscover water which was lost there? They said, we would like to bring up the old landscape in a new form, and right in the middle of the city. It was an industrial site before. What about if we peel back the skin of the city of layers which were overlaying the lost wetlands? Can we bring the wetland up? What can we do? How can we shape it? Can we make a memory line of that, what we have put over? For example, the train tracks we had there for many times. Can we do something out of it? And that was the inspiration for the design. So in dialogue with local people or with a public participation or involvement workshop, designers and planners, especially when you work sensitive, you get actually the driving energy, the driving ideas are actually coming from the public. And I'm very convinced also for artists that it's very good to have not your ego trip, but to be sensitive to that, what actually people want or what the environment is. You should never use it one-to-one. You have to transform it, because people have sometimes very crazy idea, but in their deep heart, they have something they're longing for. They cannot express it. And that might be your job to do it, to find out the solution. So what we did, we said, let's keep a kind of art wall. We peel back the skin. We bring back the animals which were lost. We make a kind of memory inlay of fragile insects which have been there. We put them actually in glass. This is bullseye glass from Portland. We created it in my studio. Again, full-scale one-to-one models. And then we brought it on site and we created this kind of art wall. And of course, also the landscape part of this whole park, which is very, very much used today and is a very, very beautiful park. By the way, very great maintenance options, because people take ownership. The people who were involved in this workshop, they have formed an organization, the Friends of the Park, and they do the cleaning and they clean up. So the city has much less maintenance costs, and there's almost no vandalism. This park after 20 years looks absolutely great. So I think there are also things we can learn in modeling new ownership and new responsibility. That brings me to another part of the world, to Asia. And I actually step in here right into Singapore. Singapore's approach about making the city within nature, or a city which is more trying to redefine what a city is. So it's not an isolated machine. It's more like an organism which is totally depending on the environment around and within a city. So the transformation of this old, ugly drain canals, monsoon drain canals, which Singapore has basically from European engineering, to get rid of water as quick as possible. We created a complete change by daylightening the streams, opening it up, making it wider, making the landscape and the engineering to fit to one solution. And of course, to come up with large-scale solutions in this, like the ABC, Active, Beautiful, and Clean program for Singapore, it was important to convince, and to actually not convince only the government and the different bureaus and the different municipality organizations, but also to convince us as planners and as people who do research, figuring out how far can we go to open up such a stream and to keep it even safe. So again, about mock-ups and models. It was a hard fight for me to convince our client, and I had to finance it actually myself from my studio, to make a mock-up model full scale as a test ridge, and to do bioengineering in this construction as a pilot project, with constructing nature-based solutions, something which is more and more now trendy, to get rid of the concrete and to recycle the materials, and to come up with that, to get a feeling what works, what kind of plants can we use, how quick do they grow, what's the root system we have. You can read a lot, of course. You can do a lot of computer simulations, but the reality is always the model. The reality is that what shows you in 1 year, how is it growing, how is it working? And that did convince not only the politicians and our clients, but also us, learning what works, what can we do, and how can we go forward. And of course, Bijan Park today, this is the mock-up still here, changed completely from here to here. Is a wide open park, extremely successful, very much visited from many, many people. And the normal conditions or the flooding, it works in an interesting way that we really get also monsoon rains that we can cover it, we hold it back. And all that is this kind of working with water, with real models, finding out how's the reality, what would it be? Because if we don't do that, we have all kinds of abstract fantasy, especially about safety. The topics when you discuss about safety, in my experience, this is one of the biggest illusions we often have. We think things are extremely dangerous and so on. So we make all kinds of regulations. And then when we ask, do you really have had experience with that? No. People don't have it, or often people who make regulations, they are coming only from the academic world without any real experience. That frustrates me a lot today, because I think we kill the future generations' opportunities to create better solutions because we are too strict with things. It doesn't mean that we have not to be careful. It doesn't mean that we have to be responsive and responsible, but we have to be more with experiments, with models, with testing things out, teaching us from reality and not just from our fantasy, what we think should be. So that's a very important learning process, I think, for making cities more resilient and livable. Mock-ups and models are extremely important to me. And I will probably end with the last project, which is also interesting and in a way also tragic, because we had in Germany this extreme floodings. You have heard about the Ahrtal flooding, a lot of people died. And the other place was actually the city of Hagen, where we have the Volme, and this city was partly flooded. I did work on this river, made it wider. I couldn't make it wide enough, actually, because it was already limited to certain things, but we tried to make this river accessible for people to go down, to open it up. There was a new town hall, which you see on the middle of this picture. And on the right-hand side, you see the steps going down. Also, everything of that was tested out with models, here also in smaller scales. Today, it's a very interesting installation. And also at night, quite interesting, people can go down to the river. There are water structures. All these water structures are tested in full scale. And then finally, inside in this town hall, there is something like a water feature, which is bringing water from the river. It looks like water from the river is actually running through that, going through different levels of this town hall. And when you come in, you actually experience water and colors and this kind of fragile but also beautiful element of water. And everyone who gets into this town hall, if you go to the mayor or for parliament meetings, you're always reminded that this water actually is the center, is important. On this river, we are sitting on this river, and the artwork is kind of an impression of consciousness, of care, of being aware about what is happening here. So maybe there's a small film how that actually works here at this thing. Maybe at the very end, I would just like to say that also training teams in or education in universities, we should have much more learning experience by hands-on. For example, what is happening if you create together a kind of stream, a kind of river, where you have that oxbows, and we say in German Prall- und Gleithang. You see the movement of water going backwards. And on this picture, you see an early picture of my former team, Herbert Dreiseitl. A lot of these people are now actually leading other teams and are working in different offices. And the learning experience for us all as community, working with mock-ups, with models in full scale, the fun we had, the adventure we had to figure out how do we have to hold the water, how do we have to fill it up, what do I have to do to bring my curve so that the next guy or the next girl who is actually behind gets the right movement and the right twist, and then how the third person can help to make that to a kind of common art project where everyone is working together. That's a social experience. That is an experience, a personal experience for learning. And water is teaching us, modeling with water is teaching us, what does it mean to be responsive, to be a social awareness, to be sensitive enough for the environment, and also basically finally to understand better landscape architecture. What is it that it is about, what we are working on, and how can we actually do better planning for the future. So with this last statement, maybe from my side, I would like to open also the discussion a bit more. And I just wanted to say that similar like Vogt had said it before, for me, mock-ups, modeling, thinking with models are something we lost by overdoing things with computers. I'm not against computers. With computers, we can do a lot, also in 3D. But the reality check and the reality education coming back by working with models, that's something we lost. And it would be great to actually bring it back into our awareness, not only in university, but also in our life, that real experience actually play a very strong part in our world. So thank you very much for that. You find also more information if you look at Dreiseitl. Laura, I just wanted to thank you so much for that. I just wanted to say my name is Dreiseitl. I know it's very difficult to pronounce, but just that you have the right wording for that. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for the discussion now.
Thank you, Professor Dreiseitl. The interesting thing that we have in the discussions within the university, and I'm happy that you underpin that, is that there's a highly belief in, of course, because it's cheaper, it's going faster, and everybody, especially from the youngsters and students, are used to that, working in computer models. And I think we are very happy in our faculty that we still have a big modeling hall. And that we're still working on that. But you mentioned the scale, and what I'm interested in what moment of the design process, which scale, which technique of modeling is being used within your office? I mean, the modeling, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of learning, observation, learning from that, reflecting on the design, and actually testing. But I think in all the different phases of a design process, it's not always the same technique that we have to use. How do you work with that? You don't start with a one-on-one mock-up.
That's true. No, absolutely, that's true. And actually, the process is, I think, very much in the beginning. You probably would do sketching, you would do mapping, you would do swatch analysis, and then you would actually make more plans on two-dimensional drawings, and then actually you start probably to come into that. It depends very much on the type of project. I think it's never, you have always to find out what are you doing, what for is this project for, and which scale or which actually moment in the process are you in, and then you have to pick the right tools. Maybe I do it very practical for a project I'm just working now. I do a new design for the city of Milwaukee in the US. And it's actually on the end, it's a park, public park on the end of Main Street in the Third Wharf area. It's an industrial site, which is close to the river. And the first thing is, of course, drawings, sketches, then also 3D computer models, basically. And then the next phase, when we actually go into the details, we make models in scale 1 to 10, for example, for a special part, which is a kind of central fountain where I want to have a very, very beautiful design solution. I do it in a scale. And I test it out. It doesn't have to be a perfect thing, which I have to use for a presentation. It's more to figuring out, how is it? Because it's much better to see it in three-dimensional size. I go with my, go down, look from different sides. How does it look like? What, how big is a person? I think what also Günther showed about, I think it was Le Corbusier, someone who made this kind of figuring out what is the landscape behind, what is the structure. So I try to test it, and the design phase starts there with a model and gets deeper into it. And then when I really want to have something very special, like the water flows on this project, I work on this project very much with seasons and colors and so on. Then I test it in full scale. And this full scale test will be done in a big hall. So I would use other materials. I use also foam and wood structures, and then I build on top of that. And then I will use pumps and real water and test it out. And until I have the right scale, and then I use scanners, 3D scanners, and make it precise, send it over to a stone fabrication factory, and they will work on the 3D datas, on the BIM datas, and then bring it into reality and carve it out. So with the technology we have today, there are so many ways then to transform or to translate actual models. So there's not an easy answer to say it has to be done always like that, but depends on what projects you do. The model phase is an extremely important part in the design process, in thinking and in making it more precise. I hope that was a good answer. And I think for Potsdamer Platz, for example, we did also small models and we did full-scale models.
Yeah, and I fully agree. I think it's interesting if you realize what design process is and what kind of input that you need, then the model is a perfect way. And I think the physical model especially helps you because it gives you a very direct feedback on what's happening. If something is falling over, it's designing on scale in a small way.
Right.
Modeling, you mentioned it, that modeling takes a lot of time, and my position in that is always, well, that's good, because if it takes us a lot of time, then it gives us a lot of time to think about what the hell are we doing. Is it working for you that way? Yeah,
it's true, and taking a lot of time, yes and no. Because I experienced that if you really spend the time in a model and you do it, and I have some interesting cases also. For example, we did one for Oslo, for the airport, the old airport in Oslo, Fornebu, and we made also a model full scale. It's actually did make the process faster because we were then finally so clear about how it looks like or how it needs to be, what material do we need, what the exact form is, and we could just go into the production process right away and without any mistakes. And that actually sometimes is speeding up the process if you spend into that. And as I said also before, with all the material and technology we have today, if we make models and we have the courage to make models, very often it's not so expensive as we think, you know, because you can use simple materials for that, put it together. To make a model is relatively quick, and it's sometimes to test things out and change it is sometimes quicker than a computer, because you just can do it and fix it, put it together, testing it out, doing things, making it different. And it might even save time. So costs and time is often a kind of, I would say, we have often the feeling it takes too long and it's too expensive. And if you test it out, you do it in reality, it's actually just the opposite.
The only thing that you have to do is really ask yourself, what kind of information do I need from the model in order to get further on? The interesting thing, we once had a student, I think that's interesting for our students, who did an actual test with that. And probably I can show the students that somewhere later. She made a model, 3 models from the same situation, I think somewhere in New Zealand, and a harbor area. And one she made simply by hand, with a little bit of stuff that's around, that you have, a little bit of paper, cardboard, whatever it is. Nail paint was even in it. And she said, timed the work that she took to the model. And she said, that model took me 2 hours. And I had the information about, let's say, the atmosphere, not the exactness, because you don't have time to do that, but I had the information that I need for the first stage of a design project. Then she made the same model again using laser cutting techniques. Then she said, that took me at least 2 days, because first of all, there were a lot of information. Translate into the drawing, then laser cut it, glue it together, and still I had the possibility to combine things, and we're all made on the same scale to combine things. So it gave me some impression, exactness, which I not completely needed in that phase of the design process. And then finally she made another one, the one that we are all fascinated from nowadays, a 3D model by 3D printing. And that took her 3 weeks.
Right.
And it didn't give the information that you needed in that phase of the design process. So I think it's important to understand what do you need in what stage of the process. I saw a question in the public. I come to you so that
it's a very. I would love to see that that comparison of these 3 things. But I fully agree. I can imagine with my experience, I also would say that's okay.
I will send you the photos of it.
Good.
Yes, I have a question about the cooling capability of water bodies in the public space, and how the cooling capability also influence your design and how you use it. I have seen a lot of hard surfaces for the design of the water bodies, and I understand that's also to do with the erosion of the water bodies. But maybe you can say something about the cooling capabilities.
Yeah, I have both. I have lots of projects which have soft surfaces and vegetation. But as soon as you have lots of people around, or if it's a dense city situation, a square or so, you have to protect the vegetation zone so much, because otherwise it would be just trampled down by people or destroyed, and then you would just have a muddy thing. And so this aspect, I think, is very, very important. It also depends where have you open water, where can you show open water, how big does it have to be as a water body, and where should you not show water, but you still have humidity and evaporation. I think, I mean, I started my work in 1980, and for me at that time, what we call today sponge cities were already very much on my agenda. I was doing early projects in Switzerland with evaporation, with filtration, with infiltration, refilling the groundwater by using rainwater, holding it back. I did write books about it, like Neue Wege für das Regenwasser was one of the very first Bibles on this topic. And it's very much about your question, how can we use in cities the textures and structures for cooling? And I think this is today and for the next couple of decades and in the future, a big, big issue because of the climate situation we have now with extreme hot days and nights, especially also here in Europe. Like last year, we could see that. And then suddenly extreme long periods without any rain. And then if the rain comes, it hits us so hard and so aggressive with a lot of water that to balance this, that needs a new kind of infrastructure, a new kind of urban landscape approach where textures and structures are extremely important. And I think it's rooftop, it's vertical structures, it's on the ground structures, and it's both. It's hard and softscape structures, and depends very much what is the place used for, what is happening there, how can you bring multidisciplinary systems into that, how can you bring nature-based solutions into that. This is a permanent learning process and a permanent testing out. I didn't focus on that in my presentation. I could give you another presentation only on this topic. I think that's for all landscape architects and planners and designers an absolutely must to know how we can actually help to make cities more healthy, more livable, and more sustainable for the extreme climate disasters we will have, and we are already right entering.
Are there more questions from the public, from the students? No? Then I give back the word to Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Herbert, for your wonderful and inspiring lecture. I do have a question if I have a couple of minutes. You said that models are old-fashioned. And I'm thinking that it's completely true also in other disciplines. Think about, for example, hydraulic engineers. At the beginning, they were actually modeling the water with these huge scale models. I'm thinking, for example, the Mississippi River model, which was used in the 30s for the New Deal, and now it's completely abandoned. I'm thinking a model in Padova that we have, my hometown, which is a distorted model of the Lagoon of Venice. They're completely outdated. Today what happened was that they tried to modeling the water through the computer, so the digital model of water. What I found very inspiring is that despite hydraulic engineering is only working on water. In your Singapore example, you had this real size model dealing with water, but also with the support, with the vegetation, which is different, I think, from what engineers do. So how did you deal with that, with this real scale model, including soil, vegetation, and water, which is completely different?
Yeah, I think working with models in one way, it's old-fashioned, or it sounds old-fashioned. As basically the hydraulic models on big rivers is not needed anymore, because we can, with our numeric flow simulations today, we can actually make a lot of things and do numeric flow calculations very precise. I think that's all true, but as soon as it gets into the living world, how plants react, how the interface is with microorganisms in the soil, how the stability is from nutrients to feed the plants and the roots, and how can the substrate hold it when there's a flooding coming up, such things. I think therefore what we did in Singapore, that was for us extremely important, and I think it still is. And we should do really more with these models to be more safe. And I think it's just very, very hard in our profession to convince colleagues and also to convince our clients to put more, I would say, awareness into that. Because, for example, for me, in Singapore, doing this mock-up full scale, we did it for 1 year, testing it, making a test reach. The arguments were against it from our clients were, why are you doing a model? Are you not sure about your planning, what should be the answer? We are always kind of, with our computer things, we are always so convinced that we know all the truths and we know everything right. But if we go deeper into that, there are a lot of things we don't know, which we just think it is like that. But as soon as we get into the living world, things are completely different. They are getting out of control of that, what we think it is. And that's why we have to kind of have a dialogue and a learning process. And the learning process, we have to give these opportunities. And models are the opportunities for this kind of dialogue and this learning process. And I would even go one step further in education. I also know that our fantasy and our way of thinking is not trained just by computer graphics and computer things. If we have three-dimensional observations, if we test things out, if we are suddenly seeing reality like water is behaving, this is creating our fantasy, is creating our imagination, is creating our attitude actually to the world, and how we actually see ourselves as kind of in a partnership with that, what the environment is, because we are thinking so isolated often, and we are totally depending on the surroundings of this planet, and that's something we have to learn. So livability, sustainability, and all these questions about a cultural approach, how to work different with landscape, that is something we learn probably more through models than only by computer education stuff.
Herbert, many, many thanks again. So we do have a break of 10 minutes.